Davidson, first of all, what a pleasure, man, to talk to you.
Yes, sir.
I think the first time I came across your work was through a sound bag for the Zebralette.
Oh, nice.
That
Yeah.
somehow, I'm not sure how I got it, or even I tried it, but there were some sounds that I played and it was like, wow, man, actually, I like those. There was a couple of like those bass clarinet sounds or some sort of like this really delayed affected type of sounds, which were really, really cool. So that was like
Yeah,
the
that
first time I came across your work. And of course, we know each other through the Facebook groups.
yes.
Um, and I see, of course, your posts, and through that, I kind of like got to know a little bit about the Winsynth. And through that, we spoke a bit before, and then we're going to talk about it as well, about your new developments, which are absolutely fantastic. And I would really love to hear the story behind how it got developed. Um, and of course, scripts. To my understanding, to my knowledge, you've been involved in scripting a lot of scripts for Contact, being a part in certain projects. So, man, you had your hands full, and you still do, with a lot of interesting stuff. So I'm curious to know, maybe at first, um, to hear a little bit about your background, how you got started with this, and how it kind of came about, all these sounds that you were starting to make for the EWI and EVI players.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it all started really. I picked up the keyboard, learned to play the keyboard when I was about 20. So before that, I've been a clarinet player and band and stuff, and had used acoustic instruments a lot. So that kind of changed once I started playing keyboards. A lot of synth sounds and things to explore and stuff like that. And I came across a breath controller, and I started using the breath controller with the keyboard kind of in conjunction. And I know that if anybody's ever tried one, that you get your breath out there and then the keyboard, but they don't really link up and
Yeah.
re-trigger velocity when you're playing. So that was my first kind of hurdle. I wanted to make something that could overcome that. So when you're playing, each time you breathe into the to the breath controller, it's going to re-trigger velocity. So like I'm looking at it kind of like a sequencer, and okay, here I need the velocity to be up to here and to trigger here for these string
Mm.
parts. And it was kind of more of a tool for like scoring. So yeah, that was kind of my first programming project, was the Midi device. And I had worked with some contact instruments and other plugins, making patches like the Zebralette ones, and ones for synth one, which is like both of them are free. So I thought, if someone gets a EWI, USB or something, and doesn't want to go out there and spend a bunch on some synths, they'd have some presets that were at least decent to play around with. But yeah,
Mm.
those are kind of like my first projects. And then getting to know how the wind controller works from the standpoint of the breath controller and keyboard, it's a little bit different. And you can kind of see advantages in either one. The biggest advantage of the breath controller and keyboard is going to be the articulations. So you're using one hand to play, and then the other hand is switching between different kind of modes of playing. So
Mm.
in a way, that's superior. But I think that the wind controller is superior in its connection to the desired synthesized sound. So like the more closely you connect how you're playing the controller with the desired instrument sound that's to be synthesized, it matches really good. And I get that question a lot, and I don't know another way to explain it other than, the original makers of the wind controller put some extra juice in there to make that connection. So it's that hardware to synthesizer connection that just kind of blew me away. And I went, hey, I can do this stuff on the keyboard, but it's like I'm playing an accordion. You're playing multiple keys at once while using the breath, and it can kind of give even the keyboard a different feel all of a sudden. So I was like, I'm getting a wind controller. They're $300, the USB EWI. And I was off and started to program, and I ran across this retired programmer out of San Diego, Bob, and he was working on a scripts for contact, which is directly for the wind controller and breath controller. So he was already kind of underway in this project. And I reached out to him, started talking with him, and developed some things to work with the WIPS wind instrument performance scripts, and then kind of helped him figure out from a player's. He was sequencing everything, so he didn't know like the reaction when you actually play it. So the part of the that project that I helped with was that, and then the convolution morphing. Contact does this thing where it takes like a convolution of each velocity layer and then kind of makes this morph thing you can do over the top effect, basically, that morphs the sounds. And I kind of helped with that part of that project, and it was really fun because he went into depth about the different aspects of the breath controller and keyboard in combination, and the wind controller and just the keyboard. But having that, this is going to be a performance thing where we can control dynamics, from a perspective of, let's get some more out of these instruments than just those static velocity hits. Like, okay, at first it was just let's get real accurate ones when we're scoring. Now it's let's use them to control those continuous controls and get real accurate in our sequencing without having to use the sequencer. So that's the real benefit of kind of looking at those scripts, looking at what you can do with Midi, putting those things together. And the math libraries that he used, the KSP math libraries, were really helpful. So it really branches out. It's him, but it's a whole community of people on the VI Control website. So they basically just deal with everything contact scripting, language, the KSP language, and everybody's little piece kind of forms into this larger piece. And he was able to really put those together from a senior engineer level of programming. So, and he was a really fun guy, and it got me excited about it. I think the next little project that I helped slightly with was for Rudy, doing some stuff with the VL Wizard, trying to get just a better connection with stuff that would use the PLG card or the software version of it. And I talked with him, and that was a really fun experience. Just, hey, I'll try this little part, and I think that's what kind of got me thinking, hey, I'd like to share this tool that I built with everybody, the Midi device tool. And you can, do quite a bit with it. It's an application, so it works really good with hardware. Like, you can put it in between your keyboard, so you run the Midi out in your USB and then the Midi back in your USB. A lot of Yamaha keyboards allow that, and then turn local off on the keyboard, and the computer will actually now be the Midi engine, and you can do all those same types of things just right on your keyboard. So I was like, all right, we got something that we can control hardware with and software, and kind of do these manipulations or scripts, if you will. Kind of like how Contact is a script that controls the engine of the synthesizer. The idea for a MIDI device was to connect the MIDI as a script coming in.
So that in general could be in case of, like, I mean, for example, I remember I had a great experience with the Prophet 6, but the Prophet 6 did not accept breath control.
Sure.
Or some sort of standard aftertouch. I'm not sure what it was, but there was a way to kind of move or control the synth through Logic environment, because that's what I was using at the time. I can imagine that the MIDI device in such case can also be something which I don't need to use Logic with, but I can just use that as a sort of a translation engine towards other synths. Am I right?
Yes. And the advantage being that it's an application is how many of those plugins you can chain together and keep the logic of each one without them kind of going out. Like, if you start to stack MIDI plugins in your host, each one will introduce a slight bit of latency, a block. So once you chain up 10 different MIDI plugins, right, it's going to have 10 different blocks of latency before it actually gets to the synthesizer. So doing it in an application, you can do in a block, this up to 100 or more modulators on Midi, and it's a little faster, and can work with hardware and without the DAW. You can use it as a kind of a standalone thing and
Very
control.
powerful thing.
You can control stuff and load up like VL70 user banks and stuff like that by sending Midi. So you play the Midi file and it's got the sysx and it loads up your user bank. So you're playing, and then you could switch your voices out that you made in the VL Wizard or whatever, and then switch between hardware and your DAW. So you could be controlling your hardware instruments at the same time, but not from your DAW. So it could be like a backup too. Say your DAW goes down while you're playing, then you have your hardware units and you switch to your hardware presets or something like that. But I guess the idea is that making those connections, making those automatic pitch bins, so it would send to do a legato or a portamento type of note or glide.
Right.
It would actually trigger the next note and then glide away from the last note that was held. So thus, like, giving you this illusion of glide, even if the synthesizer didn't support it. As long as it supported pitch bend, you could do these kind of gliding type of things, and then it would work polyphonically with chords and stuff like that. So that was kind of like a fun adventure, getting that project done. And what I was like, oh, you know what would be really fun is if I had something to play it through that reacted to all these different things. So that's when I started to get more into the contact instruments and just making presets for different synths. And every time I would, it would be like, okay, in Zebralette, you can assign through MIDI learn to the different knobs. So this is GUI kind of assignment. Of course, in Zebra, there's a modulation matrix, and you can go into more depth of the assignments, right? It makes it a little easier. But each synthesizer kind of ran into a roadblock like that. It was like, oh, I need a little bit of curve here. I need to be able to control the filter separate from the amp. Even contact, through the scripting, you can do a lot. But you're working with samples. You're always working with samples through contact. So stretching and kind of aliasing, and there's only so much you can really do with samples in general. So, being able to manipulate the sound a little bit better just through MIDI and those scripts gives us a big advantage. But there's a guideline for each one. And the Wind controller is one of the most difficult to program patches for, because it's not just, oh, it's going to have to sound good at these 8 different velocity layers, right? They have a group of velocity layers. Well, when you play the Wind controller, you hear the whole range. So the entire part of the dynamic range has to be smooth and instrument-like. So that makes it a challenge, which is fun, kind of putting those pieces together and trying to say, what can we do from the control aspect, and then what can we do from the synthesis aspect. And that kind of kicked off my need for something a little bit more than I would say that, there was definitely some options, things that worked with the Wind controller and breath controller, but I wanted a little bit more. So once again, I want to make something else but it's the sound, right? So we're gonna at that point, I figured I'm gonna make a synthesizer. And this was probably about 7 years ago, I want to say. And I was posting on the Matrom's Patchman forum, a lot of good advice and folks over there. And, they were kind of like, hey, why don't you make a sampler that's, it's got 4 different banks, and it just loads up sound fonts. So it was basically the original synthesizer that I built was called WCVSTI, and it was just a basic 4-bank synthesizer that would load samples. And it kind of had some similar aspects to it that Winsynth had a modulation matrix. It would do the equal volume crossfading, the Lotus crossfader. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And for, I don't know, a couple of years, I hadn't worked on it much. I had just kind of created that and did some patches and was just enjoying playing a lot. I'm like, hey, I've got these tools. This is kind of like pretty much all I need, right? And then I was like, hey, you know what? Other people are trying this. I'd give it to this guy that, he's like, I need really a bunch of help scoring, and I need this to come at this CC, and I need to use my breath and kind of more control it like smoothly. And every time he said he'd go in to do it graphically, it just wouldn't work because you'd have to edit I don't know if you've ever tried to program what a wind controller or a breath controller and keyboard combination does,
Not really,
but
no.
if you try to do it graphically, it's really difficult because you would have to mimic exactly those CCs, how they're coming in, and match the velocity at the exact time.
Right.
So he's using it for like scoring, so the strings would come in, use that breath and really give it the inflection, but not really have to do a whole lot more than breathe. So
Yeah.
he's like, this is perfect. This is how I envisioned how easy it could be. And that's the advantage of playing an instrument. I know a lot of people are into sequencing and using grid light controllers and kind of making things easier, player guided, automation or looping and stuff like that. But
Right.
the true key to expression is through an instrument. So that's what I'm trying to do, with my plugins and with the Midi plugins as well, or
Right.
applications. And I think that the combination of the two is the key to connecting the player with the sound that they want, with their desired controller. And there's so many types of people with different ideas. They say, "Oh, I want to play I'm really good at the keyboard, or I'm really good at the guitar, or I'm really good on my saxophone." And now we have all these tools, so kind of paying attention to those things, those wind controller guidelines, is really important. Bob set those out, and I really look back at those, and the idea of them is right. It's a logic that you can't really go back on. It works this way. This is this. It's like kind of a definite theory of how it works, right? And as long as we follow those, we can make all these really cool dynamic controllers work with each other. So even the wind controller can, I think, benefit from maybe some other styles of control that can combine into even just the wind controller. So noticing other players and different musician styles is a big part of finding new ways of expressing the instrument that you already have. It's really kind of interesting combining them like that. Now focusing in on specific thing like the wind controller and its assignments is a task in itself. So once you kind of turn it into a polyphonic thing, it becomes even trickier. And that's what that WC VSTI, the original one, was trying to do, was put everything in one place. So you had a couple of sound sources, you had polyphony, you could play polyphonically and kind of do these things with the breath controller and the wind controller. So that was the start. Then, like I said, I put it down for a little bit, and then really got back into it in another way. I was doing some programming, and I really got hooked on this one kind of programming, and I was like, okay, I'm going to explore this further. Ended up taking some C++ intro stuff, kind of learning how DSP programming works, and then had the tools to kind of take it a little bit further. So that's a big part of how the Winsynth started. And at that point, I had developed Davidson Audio and Multimedia, so I had a website that you could come and get a couple patches and some and MIDI device. And I thought that was really something that I was lacking. Was, let's just get some virtual instruments on here. And Winsynth, I learned a lot. It took me about 3.5 months to create, and then kind of a lot of learning and beginning type of problems that I think are associated with just getting familiar with different systems, different types of programming. So coming from the contact scripting over to the C++ programming it's a little bit different, and that took a little bit of time to kind of acclimate to. But I think that it did pretty. I think that it did pretty well, and the people that used it, for the most part, helped me get it to where it was stable on Mac, working on PC. You know, all the little kind of things worked out of it. But one thing that emerged out of it was just I think that the real positive parts of it were more of the synthesis section and less of the sample section.
Mhm.
So you know, I was kind of like, let's take a look at this and go down to more of a simple classic style synthesizer. And that's where I started to talk with Steve, and you know, kind
Right.
of he was bouncing that idea off me. I was also looking at some other classic instruments, and I kind of have a couple other ones that I had started as prototypes. So I had a
Wow.
few different kind of options to say we could go with this one, we could go with this one. But he was really pushing me as an EVI player and as a brass kind of wind controller player. And I thought it was a terrific idea. So we started down that path, and kind of he did all the pictures of the different controls and sent me the samples. And I listened through the samples, and then he would say, "Oh, okay, at this setting, it sounds like this," and he turned the knob. So it was kind of this back and forth to try to uh, decipher the synthesizer. But I think that the the direction that it's headed is pretty good, and with all the feedback that we're getting from all the testers, that I think it's going to shape up pretty close to the original and have some
Yeah,
new features. You know, like
for
some.
sure. I mean, I can personally say, you know, that when I first got the instrument, as it's called, the EVI-NER, right? The
Yeah.
EVI-NER, based
Yeah.
on the Steiner, yeah, the EVI Krumer, I guess, right? That's the original design it follows.
Yeah, it's in a box that looks like the Cookie Monster lives in there. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
this
yeah,
blue,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like
Yeah,
this
correct.
blue like 70s kind of
And I
shag.
was, yeah, yeah, and I was, man, I was very surprised, to be honest, how well it sounded. Even just, you know, by, you know, just turning the plugin on, even no touching, no knob tweaking, no nothing, just play. Uh, wow. Seriously, wow. Because I am very, very picky when it comes to plugins, personally speaking. I have some issues playing plugins. I'm very much used to hardware, but this really took me by surprise, man. And even when there's that section in the expert section, right, where you can actually introduce also wavetable, in merging waves, other waves into your oscillators. Um, Suddenly, I could really like, funny enough, I don't know, recreate all these expander sounds that I was always chasing, you
Sure.
know, trying to recreate, you know.
Yeah, no, the wave shaper section, it's interesting. What it is it's kind of like an effect actually.
Mm.
And what you can do is say that we were using a sine waveform, and we were sending a sine through there. The formulas that you make in the wave shaper will basically distort the incoming wave. So
Okay.
it's like a wave shaping distortion effect. But the
Uh-huh.
formulas are really interesting because you can turn that sine, say, into a triangle, or you can turn it into a saw, or even a pulse or a square sine wave by kind of modulating it from square to pulse. You know, that pulse width, and kind of get those different
Mm.
kind of things out of there. But the formula distorts the sound coming in, but we can control the amount at which it is. So that's what you're noticing is, as you increase your breath, it has a whole mechanism there to run off an expression. So you're probably using CC2 breath
Yeah,
control,
right. Yeah.
and you set that amount, you know, in the breath level that's
Mm-hmm.
coming into it, and it gives it that expression. And it's almost like it could be a fuzziness, it
Mm-hmm.
could be basically whatever the formula is programmed to. So that's really an area that it can be expanded by experimenting with your own formulas. In the manual, it kind of tells you the different how to create the different formulas. and create your own wave shaper distortion effects. And it adds a really neat thing. At the higher frequencies, it can squish. So it can add a little bit of a distortion to the higher notes that may not be as desirable as down low. But there's a lot that can be done there. And with the format, right there is you have those two effects, and they're really powerful effects. You know, a lot of times that format filter is used in different kinds of physical modeling kind of filters. It helps it give it a kind of a sound that's the same as the frequency of the body of a certain instrument. So you can say this is the frequency of inside of a clarinet and kind of apply that over, or a trumpet or a saxophone, or even just individual human vowels. So those formats is a good effect. So we thought that those two effects would help boost up just that brass kind of nature of the EVI, you know, requirement. You know, you require this brassy kind of raspy, you know, more distortion, less wind kind of noise. So no, that's an excellent thing that you brought up, and a lot of research is going into how those waveforms are created on an oscillator level. So taking those same ideas of the wave shaper formulas, taking that kind of same idea to the programming the oscillator or the sound source itself. And what we can do is, just like that chain of MIDI plugins that's 10 plugins long, we're reducing that chain and going directly for the control that we want. And usually the control that we want is over the timbre, or the dynamic over the overtone of the instrument. You know, we want that kind of inflection as the continuous control comes in. We're controlling those timbres, we're controlling those things, and going directly to where they're, you know, where they're coming out, so to speak, is good, because we can do it at a much faster rate than as an effect after. So, you know,
man, I have good feelings about this application, and because it's really
oh yeah,
it's a
blast. You know,
it's also reacts
I like
great,
layering
man,
it.
Yeah, it has that just.
Have you been able to? Have you been able to do? One user said, Frank Williams said that he could do like a kind of a growl, like he could, you know, do like kind of thing with his throat, and that was coming through. You know, or just like kind of like a fast, like, you know, tongue roll, or kind of throat. I don't know. I don't know how he's
maybe
doing it,
maybe it has to do with like a sort of LFO rate, kind of
no, he said just with his breath. He was going,
yeah.
And it's reacting quickly enough to his breath to kind of have a growl.
The funny thing is on the 4000, I'm not sure on the 5000, but the 4000 I did try it. You could actually just sing into the instrument and it growls.
Sure.
Something happens there. Not sure what's the reason for it, but when you growl when you sing while blowing into the 4000, it growls by itself. So maybe that's to do.
Well, it's because it's connected to the synthesizer probably in a way that's really fast. So it's doing that same thing. It's saying, let's go to the source. The controller's connected directly to the synthesizer module, you know, so you're getting a very direct route to that sound source. So that's probably part of it. You know, Kai has done a lot of research, and Niall Steiner before his original designs of the Kai stuff, and you know, that connection is kind of what I'm searching for, but in the code, in the code of the plugin. You want to try to do that same thing, is make up the cycles, make things as performance friendly. And that's one thing I really like about EVI-NER, is you can use multiple instances of it, stack up, and use a crossfade between them. So I can have one that has an effect in a certain settings for refinements of the controls, and then I can have stack up another layer of them, and they come in at a different octave or whatever, and blend at the different zones. So that's something that I like to add into other things. So I'll take, say, Winsynth and set up the Lotus crossfader at a certain zone, and then have
Mm-hmm.
EVI-NER come in at a certain zone. So I want to do that with my other plugins as well, as make them interchangeable, and kind of stack them up in smaller chunks. Now, the reason why stacking them in smaller chunks is how modern CPUs work. They work as multi-core processors. So what happens in your DAW, certain DAWs can split up the cores. So like one track is on one CPU, right? And another track is on another CPU. So instead of trying to do it all in one plugin, kind of focusing more on just smaller bits of the sound source that
Mm-hmm.
your DAW can put together in a larger instrument. So the performance of EVI-NER is really good. I mean, it plays on just about any system.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a huge hit. So,
No,
the,
I was
the,
also
the,
very surprised. It weighs basically almost nothing. It was like, what is it, 20 MBs?
yeah, it doesn't take up much
Wow.
RAM, and just a slight bit of the CPU. So, really leveraging that ability to make multiple instances on different tracks. It'll spread it across the cores so that you get that full usage out of the modern CPU. So we're
Beautiful.
using those cores, and kind of taking it to performance standpoint. I think that you could probably stack up, I don't know, 20 or 30 of them on a regular computer. You could have several instances coming in and out at different times. And it's a creative thing stacking them, but even just as one instance, you can do quite a bit. And that's
Mm.
fun to be able to do just in one plugin, and kind of switch the presets, but have the ability to custom fit it to your controller, and that kind of a thing, and control it like the classic one. If we can control that classic sound with our modern controllers, that's really nice.
Beautiful. Well, man, I can only just congratulate you on a great creation, man, because I'm having a ball with this plugin for the last couple of days. You know, just making, just trying stuff. You know, it actually also sounds really nicely when you stack a couple of those, because I've been working with some harmonizations through it, and I actually split. I have like this Midi harmonizer application, and I split every plugin, every track to a different MIDI channel, so I can have better control over each track. And then I stack them together, and I pan them, and I stereo image them a bit. You know,
Sure.
man, it sounds really good. I mean, again, I'm very surprised how the quality of the tone, the reaction time, and I'm not even getting into the whole tweaking business. I'm just standing at the pure signal.
Sure. And you
Wow,
know,
really.
a big part of the speed of the signal that's a little bit different from some other plugins is that actually it's taking the sample rate, and the controller speed is running at the same rate as the sample rate. So
Mm.
as you increase the sample rate of your DAW, the reaction time will also increase. So each
Okay.
one of those cycles that I was talking about, inside of there, is an entire sample buffer. So
Okay.
you can kind of do a little
Wow.
bit more in that time if it's done that way. So a lot of plugins run at a little bit different speed for MIDI, and that can have its advantages and its disadvantages.
Hmm.
And control over lag and slew is definitely a good way to kind of calm those things down, because if it's coming through very fast, you can get zipper noises and whoops and blips and stuff like that. So
Right.
keeping it in a smooth range also is an important part of that. But
Great.
I know I do. I have fun playing it, and I feel it's like really like kind of, it just feels like brassy. This is my go-to sound source for, I want analog kind of brassy, old school
Beautiful.
kind of sound, be able to do some fun modern stuff. It's cool too. So
Yeah,
yeah, no, and I really, I like working with Steve on this. He's really helped
I
me,
know.
because he's a software product consultant, so he's been able to kind of show me a different direction on, hey, let's just do something simple, give folks what they want. So he deserves a lot of thanks for that, because I could have passed that one up and done a different project. So I'm glad that he suggested it and had the time. I mean, and any feedback I get or anything that I hear from the users on the forums, I really take that into consideration, and it shapes how my products end up. So
Hmm.
as much stuff as you want to tell me, I'm ready. I'm ready to hear it, and I want to experiment a lot and
Beautiful.
get some other classic stuff out there too.
Wow.
And
Any other plugins? Any other projects
yeah,
working on?
there's definitely a couple that are underway that are also classic style synth plugins that are a little bit different of a sound source, I guess you could call it. And they're probably 75-80%. So they're in a real prototype stage right now. But
Mm,
uh, one of them is just missing a couple of pieces. So I have been looking for samples, and it looks like I may have tracked that down and kind of get those little pieces together. And then
cool.
there's those classic ones, and also some modern uh, designs. So kind of moving away from the 70s, more up towards the 80s.
Mm,
There's a lot of stuff coming out of Japan, and then a little bit beyond that, kind of the combination of those two decades. I think that there's
beautiful.
an interesting thing there too. What you
Yeah,
can
man.
do with kind of the good things of both, I guess you could say. But I would definitely say that there's quite a few things, and that there's not going to be much wait time. Like I said, I did Winsynth in about 3 months, but it was kind of my first larger project. To give you an idea, Winsynth has about 1,200 automatable parameters, and EVI-NER has about 100, 150 or something. So
Okay.
maybe it would have been better to start with EVI-NER than go to Winsynth, but
Yeah.
um, either way, I think that these classic ones will have a lot of different sound sources pretty quick, and
Mm-hmm.
that's great for players, and for you know even people that are just sequencing. One thing that's neat about the plugins is I try to provide keyboard, breath controller, and wind controller presets for everything. So, just playing with the wind controller is difficult when you're sequencing. So you may say, "Hey, I got to sequence this part. Let's use the keyboard patches." And now all of a sudden you got like really decent sequence sounds that are dynamic that just work off
Mm.
velocity.
Beautiful, man.
Just to give you
So,
an idea, kind of let me just give you an idea of kind of the difference of
sure.
from a perspective of, okay, I have this sequencing that I have to do, right? And you have a specific passage that's really tough, can't get it on this controller, you can't do it graphically, so you may use a combination of different controllers. So being able to support a keyboard and just velocity, but get that little passage down without having to get too technical graphically sequencing. So that was one thing that I really wanted to add into it, because that is the wind instrument guidelines. Is you can't just say there's only one way to look at it. You have to look at it from all three ways, and then from those ways you get an idea of how to benefit the other. So there's things that can be learned from other instruments too, and that's one thing I really try to hone in on and look towards is, hey, once you get to this is as much as this instrument can do, you pick up another one and say, what can it do for the other instrument? It's kind of weird, but it works.
Curious to ask, have you shown this to Niall yet?
You know what? I haven't talked to him, but I did talk with Mark a little bit, which is close.
Yeah.
I'm sure at some point I get linked up with him, and
Well,
it would be really fun to chat with him for sure.
yeah, I just got a message from him today that we're gonna do this also with him,
Oh,
this
nice.
conversation. So if you wish, I can definitely show him this and then tell him, hey, Davidson in
Oh,
Colorado.
well, I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here even talking about it if it weren't for him. I mean, hey,
Yeah, for sure.
he's the OG on this thing. He's
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
the inventor, yeah.
The inventor. Yeah, that's true.
The ultimate wind controller inventor. It's awesome.
Yeah.
No, he's a big influence of mine, you know. Just as a player and as a developer. I mean, just you couldn't. I don't know. It's like the
There
perfect
is
storm
this,
there.
I mean, there's the Kuma, obviously the EVI Kuma, but there's also the Steiner phone synthesizer module,
Sure.
which is something that he made. So I'll be definitely going to be talking to him about it because there are certain sounds which especially, I mean, Brecker played it a lot, so you could hear back in the 80s when he played with Steps Ahead, he used that thing and the Expand, if I'm not mistaken. But I got my hands on certain demos, like home demos, through Joe Peskin,
Wow.
where he shows Niall in his studio practicing on his built-in or self-built synthesizers. Man, that's something else. So I'm really, really curious to know about those synthesizers that he used to build.
Sure.
And who knows, man? Maybe a certain connection can be made, and we can learn a bit about how the Styrofoam module got created, which is a bit of a different. It's a different module than the Kumar. So
Yeah, and there's also some interesting stuff too. Is the all the filters that
yeah,
he came up with. He came up with a lot of different types of filters, and set apart from the Moog and the ARP
mm,
synthesizers at the time. Their filters sounded a lot different. So
yeah,
his influence on filters really came through in his synthesizers. I mean, it had a unique tone,
definitely.
and a really good tone for using with wind controllers for sure, because that's what it kind of came from. I mean, he was coming from that direction, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
he's not just, hey, we're hitting this key. He's like, we're doing this thing dynamic, right? That's the way we do it. So that's awesome. No, I would really like for him to try it. I'm sure he would have some criticisms and maybe not. Maybe he's like, hey, this is pretty close. I hope so. You know, he's
Yeah,
I'm ready for anything. And also it's in a test stage, so we could always change something around if we
yeah,
if we need to get closer. But yeah, no, I'd love to hear what he thinks about it.
yeah. I'll,
And
I'll see. I'll see if I'll manage to kind of like if I'll feel it's right, then I'll just show it to him, and then who knows. He
sure.
seems to be a very gentle person, man. So I think
Yeah.
he would appreciate to see such a thing. Man, beautiful stuff. Seriously, man, I really hope this EVI-NER is gonna be out there, man. And I'm from a player's perspective, man, it just sounds great and it feels great, and it doesn't feel like a plugin, which is also something that I noticed. The fatness and the expression of the sound doesn't feel like other plugins where you have usually that feeling that they always sound the same. If you know what I mean.
Sure.
There's something about plugins that are very equal all the time. They're always kind of, you know what to expect, while with hardware, it's not always the case. Hardware has that feel that it's never the same.
Sure.
And that's actually a cool thing because there's always a different reaction towards the sound you're playing because it doesn't sound always the same. I have the same feeling with this plugin. That's why I was very surprised because you play it and they're like, an hour ago it sounded different. I didn't move any button. I say that as a positive thing because I think that's great because that means that it behaves like a real instrument that you have to kind of sit 20 minutes and warm up before you can go out there and play.
Sure.
So
Yeah, a little bit of that too is the probability and the random things that are kind of going on behind the scenes.
I'm sure
So
there's a
yeah, the
reason.
just like when Niall came up with his idea, he came up with the spectral distribution. It's like this way of splitting up the different inputs to go to different areas, and kind of made it a fancy name. And it's things that are going on that are unexplainable.
Hmm.
So I tried to do a little bit of the same and add the ability to do some little random things to the wave as you're playing. So yeah, you get a little bit of
Beautiful.
that classic kind of. If you want it in tune, it'll be totally in tune, but also can be put into modes that it's a little bit more variable, you know, which it gives you
Cool.
that uniqueness.
Beautiful.
One thing I think that is different about the sound too is the oscillators. So the sound source that it comes from has a certain programming, and you know, always improving on that and
Beautiful.
trying to get new things figured out in that area of the sound source. So there's some fun stuff to come on that, and you know, I hope that I can continue to get the help that I'm getting from the players and the users, and
Mm-hmm.
to the developers that are helping me out as well. So, like I said, you know, in my manual, in my documentation, I just list everybody that helps me on the project. So you'll get to know the different people that
Mm-hmm.
got to bring it to you. But
Beautiful.
you know, it kind of just takes, I think, someone saying this is something that I really want, and I'm passionate about it, and I want to bring this to people, you know, as a tool to make other people happy. You know, it's going to make the musician happy, I think, but once the musician can take that and make the crowd happy, that's what really, you know, that's what makes
Sure.
me happy. You know,
Definitely.
that's really the intended purpose. I know that a lot of musicians will play for hours and no one hears it, and then now someone's hearing it, and it makes all these people really happy. You know, they're having a good time a lot of the time listening to
Sure,
music.
man.
So
Definitely.
that's what's fun. It really is.